There are good presidents and there are bad presidents, and between them is a rather definite line. Some common traits of being a good president are good communication skills and extroversion, a priority to better and improve the nation, and a conviction and stubbornness to get things done.
An example of a good president is Franklin Roosevelt. FDR started off his presidency with his famous 100 Days, a list of legislation that he had planned to pull the country from the grasp of the Great Depression. This included temporarily closing the banks to halt the banking crisis and prevent further collapse. Starting the New Deal legislation both directly and indirectly helped the populace with funding, and keep the nation informed on the state of the country by radio with his famous fireside chats. This is a great display of national priority, communication, and conviction.
On the other hand, being a bad president would mean a display of the opposite: secrecy of national action, passing legislation that overall harms the nation, or a lack of initiative to improve it. This can well be shown in debatably the nation's worst president, James Buchanan. There was not much legislation Buchanan passed due to the stalemate with Congress, but he held office during a tense time in the nation.
The North and South were nearing a divide due to tension between viewed rights and liberties, slavery in particular. After the Dred Scott decision, which recognized slavery as legal, the nation was at its breaking point. Buchanan denied the rights of states to secede, but also held that the federal government couldn't do anything to stop it. He retained this ambiguity and indecision until the end of his office, leaving the next president to deal with it. This is the epitome of lack of conviction and harming the country, one that led to the U.S. Civil War.
Using these standards, a good or bad president could rather easily be decided. Warren Harding, for example, was already seen as a bad president, according to national ranking. But why? To begin, Warren Harding was a very active Ohioan in his hometown of Maryland, but his inactivity, by means of accepting party bosses to run politics, sent him far into politics.
Harding served in the Ohio State Senate as lieutenant governor, for which he served 2 terms, although he avoided many of its meetings, especially those of important issues, so as not to get on anyone's bad side. While his campaigning for governor was unsuccessful, he was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1914, and when placed in the 1920 presidential election, he won the Republican nomination and 60% of the national popular vote, largely for his plans of normalcy.
America's present need is not heroics, but healing. Not nostrums, but normalcy. Not revolution, but restoration. Not experiments, but equipoise. Not submergence in internationality, but sustainment in triumphant nationality.
For this and other reasons, he is branded as a bad president. The idea of normalcy itself is a complete inactivity in controlling the economy, leaving it separate from the government, showing a lack of initiative. This separation ultimately led to an economic uncertainty and eventually the Great Depression.
Farther negligence of Harding is shown by the fact that he delegated a majority of his dealings to his friends that he appointed to his cabinet, who were rather incompetent at their jobs. For example, his Secretary of Treasury, Andrew Mellon, organized legislation to push through tax cuts for the rich, stopped antitrust actions, and opposed organized labor. In other words, dismantling legislation that his predecessor, Theodore Roosevelt, had passed.
Furthermore, legislation he had passed included the enactment of the Dawes Plan, which revised Germany's war debt situation, but also tied the economies of Europe to that of the United States, meaning that, when the U.S. encountered the Great Depression, it brought Europe's economies with it. Harmful legislation. However, the incapable cabinet is most well seen in Harding's greatest misgiving, the Teapot Dome scandal.
The incident goes that Roosevelt set aside oil reserves for the United States Navy as it was transitioning to petroleum fuel. 3 oil fields, including one beneath Teapot Rock in Wyoming, were placed under the Navy's control as a reserve in case of extreme emergency. During Harding's administration, his Secretary of Interior, Albert Fall, convinced him to give control of the oil fields to him, to a position that was quote-unquote better able to control them. Shortly after that, Fall accepted bribes from Sinclair Oil and Pemex to drill in these reserves. The scheme was quickly found out, and it ended with the first U.S. cabinet member to be sentenced to prison.
It was likely that Harding would have also been questioned for his part in the scandal, possibly facing impeachment. However, he died in 1923, leaving his vice president, Calvin Coolidge, to continue his office. Warren Harding employed the key aspects of being categorically bad as a president, well reflected upon by the fact he is officially categorized as the 3rd to 5th worst president of the United States. Harding was incompetent to be president.
His cabinet, which he relied on, was unstable and harmful to the nation with the legislation they enacted.
His normalcy campaign led to the downfall of America's economy and Europe's due to his legislation.
His legislation often dismantled that of the preceding president, only to be rectified by another Roosevelt when the nation was in a situation his administration caused.
Warren Gamaliel Harding, due to being harmful to the well-being of the nation, was a truly bad president.